everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Al Pacino's Prison Scene, the podcast where we look at movies that objectively have no deeper meaning and we think about it. As always, I am your host, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Jake Ferrier.
I'd like to take this time to talk about Roxy's birthing hips.
So, of course, what Jake is referring to is the character of Roxanne in the 2010 feature film Megamind, who inexplicably has some very large hips, but that is the movie we are going to be discussing today, Megamind. And this movie holds a very special place in my heart. It is one of my favorite DreamWorks films, but I think that it is one of the most underrated DreamWorks films, as it was released the same year as Shrek Forever After and the first How to Train Your Dragon movie.
All right, hold on one second. Pause. Oh, fuck! I'm working. Oh, this bougie shit.
So I think that Megamind is one of the most underrated DreamWorks films. But of course, it is about this guy with a giant blue head. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the summary. So the movie kicks off with Megamind falling to his death, and he's like, boy, I bet you're wondering how I got here, which I read, as a matter of fact. This is kind of me going off the rails a little bit, but that opening the movie like that was Guillermo del Toro's idea, which kind of blew my mind.
Is he in the movie?
No.
Did he do anything?
He came on to help within like the last 3 weeks of production, and he was like, you should start it like this. And they were like, okay.
All right.
But so the movie starts with him falling to his death, and he's like, well, I bet you're wondering how I got here. And then, it goes all the way back to the beginning when he's a baby, and he's being shot off his planet, and his dad says, you are destined for, and then his ship closes up, so he doesn't know what his dad says. And he's like, boy, I wonder what I'm destined for. And then he gets shot off to Earth, and on the way there, he flies past another baby being shot off, who will grow up to be Metro Man, and Metro Man lands in like a rich lady's house, and Megamind lands in a prison. So right from the beginning, you have their kind of duality set up. But then over the course of their childhood, they become kind of rivals and grow into rivals. And then it comes to present day, where Megamind is fighting off Metro Man, but then Metro Man dies. So Megamind's like, well, I'm going to take over the city now. But then he finds out, once you have everything, there's nothing more to have. So he has lost his meaning to life. So he creates a new superhero called Titan. But Titan doesn't want to be a superhero. He just wants Roxy and her little childbirthing hips or whatever you said. But Roxy doesn't want none of Titan because he's kind of a jerk. So Titan's like, man, I'm going to be the bad guy. So then Megamind's like, well, shoot, if he's the bad guy, we can't both be bad guys. So then he goes and finds Metro Man, who wasn't dead. He just faked his death to become Music Man. Yeah, spoilers, my bad. But he faked his death to become Music Man. And then Megamind's like, bro, we need your help. He's like, nah, man, I'm a Music Man now. And Megamind's like, well, shucks. But Metro Man does tell him, when there's evil, good will rise up against it. I have found my true calling, and now it's time for you to find yours. And that sort of inspires Megamind to then become the hero and defeat Titan and become Metro City's new hero. So, Jake, usually I think I'm the one that kind of starts the discussion, but I wanted to open it up to you and see if you had anything right off the top that you wanted to open our discussion with today.
All right, let's get meta right quick. All right, first off, and we'll get to this, I think that one of the biggest themes in this movie is perception. All right?
Okay.
But I want to talk about the voice actors playing the characters. All right, so with Metro Man, we have Brad Pitt, okay? And then Megamind, we have Will Ferrell. Typically, I would assume the average person would see Brad Pitt as a more distinguished actor. Has he won any Oscars? He hasn't won any Oscars, right?
I would assume so. I'm not sure, but I would think he's had to have.
But
either way, he's the leading man, nonetheless.
Yes. In a lot of films, and we're kind of coming out of this era of movie stars, where you go to see a movie because it has somebody in it. You go to see a movie because it has James Dean in it. We're kind of moving out of this era, but I would say that Brad Pitt is, one of these last surviving members of this group of true movie stars. And, he's got a lot more respect in terms of, serious filmmaking than Will Ferrell does. And Will Ferrell has done a lot of comedic work. I like a lot of it. But everybody usually overlooks his more serious work. One in particular is very close to my heart, and one of my favorite movies of all time is called Everything Must Go. It's a very small scope, very serious film, and there's a bit of comedic relief in it. Um, but as far as the two compare, Brad Pitt is much more respectable than Will Ferrell. Much like Metro Man and Megamind. Metro Man is beloved by everyone, whereas Megamind, nobody likes him, really. And so I think it's very interesting how they cast this movie. Brad Pitt playing the serious, beloved character as he is himself, and then Will Ferrell playing the more comedic character, the one that, you know, um, everybody takes less serious. And that even goes farther to David Cross playing Minion. And I don't know who voices Roxy, but
It's Tina Fey.
we have this very meta casting, which I think is very interesting um, thing that happens in this movie.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I definitely think that across the board the casting was great. Of course, you mentioned David Cross as Minion. We also have Jonah Hill as Titan, and even the side character of the Warden being voiced by J.K. Simmons. I think is a perfect casting. But the thought of like behind the scenes perception, I think is very interesting because I was looking at the Wikipedia article for this movie, and apparently they wanted to cast Robert Downey Jr. as Megamind, but because of like scheduling conflicts, that just wouldn't work. And I think that for the purposes of this movie, Will Ferrell is a much better cast for Megamind than Robert Downey Jr. would have been.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And maybe that's what destiny called for.
Yeah, and that's the big thing in this movie is destiny. Like I mentioned in the summary, his father says to him, "You are destined for blank," which I think you can see his lips. I think he says greatness. And I watched the trailer for the movie before we did this, and in the trailer he actually says greatness, and
Yeah.
Megamind's like, "Well, that's a lot for a kid to live up to."
So I think he actually is saying greatness. But, in the movie, it's unclear. And Megamind doesn't know what he's destined for. All he knows is that he's destined for something. And because the whole movie, he's searching for this destiny.
And of course, he thinks that it is for him to be a supervillain. He even says once, if not twice, in the movie that he was destined to be the supervillain.
Yeah, and let's talk about the opening right quick. So the narration. Number one, I would say that this is probably the most accurate retelling of the story that we've had so far, in terms of the other films we discussed, because um, it opens with the present and then goes to the past, but at the end of the movie it comes back to the present. So it's almost as if he's kind of reliving his life in those final moments, as if he were about to die. But the opening narration is a great shot. It's Megamind falling over like a sunset, and at this point, we don't know that Megamind is the quote unquote villain, and it's very reminiscent, not filmically necessarily, but just kind of the tone it sets. So it's sort of like Superman. It's kind of like this New Horizons kind of thing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then it goes into, of course, the classic um, Superman thing where his home is getting destroyed and he's being shipped off to Earth, right? And while I was watching this, it's interesting. So this is March 31st of 2020. Recently, this past Monday, we have witnessed police brutality surrounding George Floyd's death, and then all the riots going on. Seeing more police brutality, and it's interesting that I think one of the biggest themes of this film is as I said, perception, but also, we have the privileged. So Metro Man is very privileged his entire life. You know, out of the two, we see Metro Man and we see Megamind. Out of the two, Metro Man um, he has a better ship, and then he crash lands into a rich family's home, right? And he's got all these powers, which give him the advantage automatically in this duel of the fates, if you want to call it that. Whereas Megamind he has a crappy ship and shot into a prison. So immediately before the movie even really starts,
Well,
good.
not only is he shot into a prison, he is actually headed towards the rich house that Metro Man eventually lands into, but Metro Man's ship knocks him off
Yes,
course.
yes. So before the movie even starts, we have already set up, kind of like this bias of how their lives are going to go.
Right. No, I would definitely agree with that because like you said, their ships obviously look different, and when they're flying through the space, Megamind's ship is like putting along, and there's little clouds of smoke shot behind him, and Metro Man's ship is just smoothly going along, and there's like a stream coming behind it. So very clearly from the beginning, Metro Man is set up as to be like the quote unquote better individual of the two people.
Right. And so it's just interesting to me, especially when of the time of filming this episode, what's going on, and then how Megamind the movie relates to it. Um, and so it just seems like there is this really, really underlying message about privilege and injustice that leads to perception, which we'll get into.
Right.
Well, and this kind of plays into what you're talking about, but I definitely think that this movie could be seen as
Either an allegory or an analogy. I'm not really sure which terminology is correct, but for the psychological debate of nature versus nurture, because throughout the entire movie, Megamind is perceived as the bad guy, but at the same time, he was raised in a prison, and Metro Man was
Well,
raised in the house of privilege.
yeah. Not
So
only
it's
was he
not
raised in a prison.
necessarily.
Go.
You go ahead.
Okay. He not only was he raised in a prison, but he spent his entire life fighting the system. So because he was born in the prison, there was the not born, but shot into the prison. There was this expectation of him to be the bad guy.
Right. So from the instant of him being here on Earth, there's already this bias against him that he is the villain. And like I said earlier, he says several times that he was destined to be the supervillain, which of course we know by the end he decides to be the hero. So then there's that question of, well, maybe it was in his nature to be the hero all along. Which even Metro Man, I think one of the last lines in the movie is Metro Man saying, like, I knew that you had it in you.
Yeah. That's one of his last lines. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see that how this sets everything up.
Well, and even just beyond the privilege gap between Metro Man and Megamind, the nature versus nurture question, I think, comes back later when Megamind accidentally gives Hal or Titan the Metro Man's powers, and he tries to like nurture Titan into the hero that Metro Man was, but because of who Titan is internally, it doesn't work.
Right.
He's selfish and all he cares about is getting Roxy. And so when he can't have that, he just goes completely off the rails.
Well, and I think that so there has always been this debate of nurture versus nature, right? But recently, in the past few years, sociologists have kind of determined that it really is a combination of both, which I think that we can all agree on, because it's never absolutely one way or the other. But you know, his entire life, Megamind was nurtured to be the bad guy. But like you said, we see his true nature come out, and we see him be the good guy. And I think the same goes for Hal, or Titan, is that it is in his nature to not be the good guy, but also one of the first things that Megamind says to Hal, or Space Dad says to Hal, is that he's going to get the girl, right?
Yeah.
Which I think so that's nurture, and that really sets up why Hal becomes a bad guy because he doesn't get the girl.
Well, that is even stated several times throughout the film. I think the first time Minion says it to Megamind that the bad guy does not get the girl. So
Right.
by Roxy rejecting Titan in this story, in the rules that we have set up for this story, because she rejects him, that makes him the bad guy. You know,
So
and
that can even go further into the power of women.
their seductress powers.
Yeah.
Well, and even because she says that everybody thought that her and Metro Man were an item, but she says that they never were.
Yeah.
Which, if we're going by the same rules, then does that then make Metro Man the villain? Obviously, Megamind is the protagonist of this story, and he is the one that presumably ends up with Roxy in the end. And because Metro Man chooses to leave the town, does that then make him the villain or a
So
villain?
I don't know about a villain per se, but so bad guy doesn't get the girl, good guy does. Um, Metro Man could be morally ambiguous, meaning that he's neither.
Okay,
Um, so if he's neither, not only is he not the bad guy, but he's not the good guy either.
right.
So he doesn't get the girl because he's not the good guy.
And yeah, I think that will fits his character because at one point when he's retelling, when Megamind and Roxy find him, and he's like, "I'm Music Man now." He retells the story of how he faked his death, and in that he says every citizen in Metro City had something I never had, a choice.
Yeah,
So by him saying that, he's kind of acknowledging that this narrative that we're in of heroes versus villains and good versus evil, that he also, like Megamind, never really had a choice of whether to be good or bad or whatever they wanted to do with their life. They just had to do whatever everyone else thought they had to do. End of discussion.
yeah. Well, and not only is that Metro Man's choice for that, not only is that moment his moment of choice, but that's also Megamind's moment of choice.
Right, because soon after that is when he acknowledges he's in the prison cell, and I mean I don't remember exactly what he says, but he acknowledges that he's been bad in the past, but if the warden doesn't release him now, then all might be lost because he's the only one that can stop Titan.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna backtrack because we talked a lot about this. I'm gonna backtrack so we can make our way forward through the movie. So we've talked a lot about perception and kind of like quotes and sayings that set up heroes and villains. Um, and I kind of want to go back to near the beginning, um, the scene where Megamind escapes prison. Well, actually, we're gonna go back even before that, and kind of just I want to extend on the point of perception. So when they're in school, and Will Ferrell's giving his narration, there's a montage of sequences that takes place, and you know Metro Man is always the one that comes out on top. Dodgeball. He makes like popcorn, and Megamind always comes on the bottom. He's always picked last for dodgeball. He blows the school up. Um, because it's only because he's only doing this in order to achieve sort of acceptance from his classmates that he can't get because of his classmates have already decided how they're going to see him.
And he even says, I think this is shortly before or during all this stuff with the school. He even says, Metro Man has superpowers, and I have intellect designed for mayhem. So he believes that that his intellect can only be used for evil.
Right.
Even though he's trying to get the affection of his classmates, he's doing so in a way that makes him look like the bad guy, whether
Yes.
that was his intention or not.
Which I don't think it was, but um, so in Age of Ultron, we're gonna jump movies for a second. In Age of Ultron, at the end of the movie, when Vision is talking to Ultron in the forest after it's the last Ultron body, Vision says he says something along the lines of, I pity them or something because they think that there is a difference between chaos and order.
Yeah.
So the idea of this kind of makes me think about the idea of quote unquote mayhem, right? He says um, his intellect was used for mayhem, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative mayhem, a destructive mayhem.
Right. Well, even, historically, and this, again, is getting topical with what's going on currently as we're recording this, riots, have been used for the oppressed to overthrow their oppressors,
Right,
which would be designated as mayhem to those that are against the oppressed.
right.
So maybe Megamind wasn't trying to stage a revolution, but there is a precedent for mayhem being used to change the status quo for the better.
Right. So not necessarily a negative negative destructive power, but a force for change.
Right.
And then we go into the prison scene. All right, the first time he escapes. Um, well, okay. So I wrote this down, and I want to say this. So the system is against Megamind, right? If we want to use the word, he's the oppressed. You know, he um, he's in the system that is working against him. So unfortunately, instead of continuing to fight the system, he conforms to the system.
Yes. And that's kind of exclamated upon by the warden, who says to him, "You're a villain. You'll always be a villain. You'll never change, and you'll never leave." Which I think is kind of what drives Megamind for a majority, or at the very least, the first half of the film. Is he's like, "Well, I'm the villain." Like you're saying, he just kind of conforms to what society wants him to be, and he's like, "Well, I'm the villain, so I'm going to be the villain."
Yeah,
But then, as soon as Metro Man is gone, the yin and the yang is something that's discussed several times throughout this movie. So you can't have evil without any good. And supposedly, if you have evil, good will rise up to stop it. But that never happens. So Megamind is left with a sense of meaninglessness.
yeah, yeah.
And he even says this. I really like this scene. He's talking to like the bird that's on his desk, and he says,
Yes,
"Always
yeah,
thirsty, never satisfied, purposeless emptiness. It's a vacuum, isn't it?" So he's kind of realizing that by subscribing to or conforming to what society wants him to be, once that has played itself out, now since he had created no self-identity for himself, he doesn't know what to do. He's completely lost.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that scene because I had written that down too. But the song that is playing during the montage, or right at the end of that montage, right before he talks to his bird, is or I guess actually no, it's not a song. He says it. He says "Alone Again," naturally,
Yeah,
and then he goes into "Always Thirsty, Never Satisfied."
which I think this is shortly after Metro Man has quote unquote died, even though we, the audience, after watching the whole movie, now knows that he faked his death. So he believes
Spoilers.
that is accented upon by a broadcast from Roxy or Roxanne, and she says, "He was always there for us, dependable. Perhaps we took him for granted, or maybe we don't know how good we have it until it's gone. To Megamind, are you happy now? And as we've seen in the scene previously before that, which is when he's talking to the bird, he clearly is not happy and does
Right.
not know
Absolutely.
what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, purpose is this. The only thing he was living for is now gone. You know.
So, in addition to that, since now he has no meaning, in addition to perception, I think this is kind of another layer onto that. This movie, to me, has a lot to say about identity. And I
Oh,
think the
and
biggest,
I love to hear that.
yeah, as you always say, Jake, this is about self discovery. I
It's
really
a
believe
story about self-discovery,
Megamind is about self
and you
discovery.
cannot argue against that. This movie is 100% about self-discovery. You know what? As a matter of fact, let's end the episode because we have our answer. Self-discovery.
Well,
That's
well,
what it's
well, well,
about.
well. I do agree with you, but I have some more to say. I think we haven't even discussed Bernard yet, which is where I want to get to here. Megamind has to pretend to be this guy, Bernard, initially just so that Roxanne won't know that he is mourning the loss of Metro Man. But then over the course of the film, he begins dating Roxanne as Bernard. So he's putting on a front as someone who is quote unquote normal, and that he believes that's the only way Roxy could be affectionate towards him.
So when you say putting on a front, that implies that he is acting out of character, which technically, so far in the movie we have seen, he is acting out of character, but he has already been putting up this front. So I think we see Bernard, now that he has shed this perception, now that he has shed the expectation of him to be a villain, he can be who he truly is. So
Yeah,
when you
and
say
I
he's putting up a front, I don't think he's putting up a front at all.
well, I think that goes back to the nature versus nurture debate. But in the scene where they're in the diner, when Bernard and Roxy are in the diner, Bernard as Mega Man, uh, Roxy says to him, "We don't judge someone by how they look; we judge them by their actions." And
Yes.
so, as like you said in this movie, up until this point, and especially to the greater world in the movie and Roxanne, Megamind is the villain because all he has ever done is destroyed things and tried to kill Metro Man.
And
So,
this is what society expects him to do.
right, right. So, in that sense, he is putting up a front. But I do agree with you that Megamind as Bernard is the true Megamind that lies beneath.
Yeah.
And
Um,
I think that he sees Bernard as an escape because, of course, at the end of that toast, he says to being normal, and then of course it all goes to crap because
right,
Roxy messes with the watch.
right. And then, on that idea of putting up a front, um, if we go back to the scene where he first turns into or first turns into Bernard, there is a parallel dialogue, and an external self dialogue. Um, so we have Megamind talking to himself, and then we also have Roxy talking to themselves, and it goes back and forth. They each say a line that contrasts each other, and one of the and it kind of plays into this idea of perception and confusion because in reality, so one of the things that Roxanne says, I don't remember exactly a lot of things, but the last thing that they say is Roxanne is talking about how Metro Man is gone and now Megamind rules the city. So she said, "What will we do as the society, as the citizens?" Um, but Megamind is having this existential conversation, and he says, "What will I do?" And during this conversation, Megamind is talking about how I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember exactly, but he's saying things that are very um, not what a villain would say. He's kind of he's in this existential conversation. He's trying to figure out what he's gonna do without Metro Man, and he's kind of questioning why he's a villain and how this stuff. And Roxy is just being like, instead of you know, thinking about the possibility of Megamind not being a bad guy, whatever. She is like, he's a bad guy. Megamind is a bad guy. Metro Man was the good guy. Now he's gone. Megamind is cruel and vicious and horrible. And what are we going to do about that? So there's this duality, this play here, um, of Megamind saying his truth, and instead of Roxy, who represents society, instead of taking a second to think about Megamind's truth, she is assuming something that absolutely isn't true at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I also want to point out that their conversation is not where the parallelism in that scene begins. They both get on an elevator at almost the exact same time, and there's a scene, I believe it's like a double shot, where you see both of them going up in the elevator at the same time, although they are in separate elevators. And the scene ends with them in the elevator together,
Yeah,
although Megamind is now dressed as Bernard. So
and
after they both have their parallel, pretty much exactly the same conversation, they both end up literally in the same place, in the same elevator, leaving Metro Man behind.
yes, well, and right before then, Megamind meets Bernard, which is when he turns into Bernard. Um, but Bernard said it makes fun of Megamind, thinking that he's like a cosplayer. And he says Megamind's head is not that grossly exaggerated, which plays even more into the idea that like they don't actually know who Megamind is.
Yeah, and I did catch that line in the movie, but as you just said that now, it got me thinking about the metaphorical head, which in most cases refers to ego. You know,
Yeah,
him saying, so maybe the underlying message of that scene is Megamind's ego is not that large, whereas we have seen supposedly he seems to have this giant ego, and he's like, haha, I'm the supervillain, I'm going to take over. But as we've seen without Metro Man, he has no ego, pretty much. He has no identity at all.
yeah, yeah,
And so, and even just literally, like you said, maybe the people don't really know Megamind. Uh, Bernard saying that about him kind of deflates Megamind's own self-image because at this instance in the movie, Megamind himself doesn't even really know who Megamind is.
yeah. I agree. Um, yeah, and I think you know this goes this idea of identity and like questioning oneself. What we were talking about Bernard being kind of this escape from Megamind to be someone else. Um, hold on, I'm thinking.
Well, while you're thinking, I think that that is addressed by Minion. I think this is right before uh, Megamind as Bernard goes on the date in the diner with Roxy. Minion tells him basically, he says, "You're the bad guy. The bad guy doesn't get the girl. What do you think you're doing?" And then Megamind says, "Well, I don't want to be the bad guy anymore." And then right after he says that, he uses the watch to turn into Bernard, and he looks into a mirror that is
Yes,
broken.
yes, it's broken. Yes, it is broken.
So I think that is like very clearly symbolism that Megamind now has a fractured identity.
Well, not only is it broken presently, but it is broken in that scene. In the scene between Minion and Megamind. It is
I didn't
broken in
notice
that
that.
fight.
Yeah. Okay.
So they have this fight. Let's say Minion represents um, Megamind's villainous side, and the current Megamind in that scene represents Megamind's heroic side. Um, and so it's kind of this internal dialogue manifesting itself.
Right. Well, and then you could even argue that obviously it is a conversation between two characters, but Minion has been with Megamind since the very beginning, so it could be argued that this sense of being nurtured or to be the bad guy was placed upon Minion as well because he was always with Megamind.
Yeah,
And then Minion is like, "What are you doing? Like, this is who we are. You can't go back on who we are." And then Megamind is fighting that. Of course, right after that, they have the diner scene where all is revealed, and that kind of is basically just all reversed.
yeah,
And Megamind thinks that he can never be more than just the villain again.
yeah. And I would say one of the main things that Megamind is striving for this entire movie is a sense of belonging.
Right. Well,
And
that
so,
I would agree with that completely. You know, just going back to even at the very beginning when he says that he was picked last for dodgeball, and in that scene, the girl who was picked like right before him is on crutches with a broken leg, I think.
yeah,
So he has never belonged ever in his life, which I think is really what causes his questions of identity and his belief that as Bernard he can't be quote unquote normal.
yeah. But in the lack of belonging, he has found his place as a villain. So no, he does not belong to society necessarily, but he does in that he has found his place and he belongs in that place. So I think this is really why we have this struggle of identity is that now there is this opportunity for him to belong truly and be integrated into a positive society. And this is a huge risk for Megamind, as it because if it goes poorly, he would lose the only sense of belonging he's ever had.
And you're talking about him as Bernard, right?
I'm talking about Megamind belongs in a villainous place,
Okay.
and Bernard gives him the opportunity to exist in a positive place. There's that risk
Yeah,
there.
I would certainly say, yeah, that tracks. I would certainly say that really until he starts talking to the bird, which I think is where he kind of has his first existential break. Megamind has this role to play, like as we said, society placed it upon him to be the villain. But the idea that our main characters are just playing roles within society, I think, is brought up within the first 10, 15 minutes of the film by Metro Man. Because as he is at his celebration for the unveiling of the museum, I think it was, he's like flying around, you know, to be like, I love you, random citizen, or whatever.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
he says, but right before he says that, he says, who would I be without you?
Yeah.
Meaning that without the people of Metro City, he's nobody. And it's like he says at the end when he's become Music Man, he didn't have a choice. And you know, I mean, we already said this, but Megamind didn't have a choice. So they're both playing the roles that society gave them to play, even though neither of them are really happy with that role.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in that same, kind of scene on Megamind's side, he's captured Roxy and he's trying to threaten her. And Roxy says, to various things, there's like the boots, there's the saws, there's the sharks. Every time he does something, she's like, "Yeah, I expected that."
Yeah,
You
but
know,
the spiders knew.
right. But also Megamind didn't expect the spider too.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, I don't know if that was just supposed to be like a joke, like, haha, he said spider wrong, but that I think is a very clear metaphor for uh, kind of Megamind's character in the film. It's like the one thing that kept that scene fresh for Roxy was the one thing that he didn't even plan to happen. And then
Right.
even when Metro Man is like, "Oh no, my weakness is copper," Megamind, you see him on a screen in the background throughout that whole scene, and he's very clearly clueless. He has no idea what's going on.
Yeah. And he expects Megamind to escape.
Right, Metro Man.
Yeah. So, we have perception, but now with perception comes expectation.
Right, and I think all of this kind of comes to a head when Hal is inadvertently given the powers of Metro Man. Because
Yes.
as Roxy says at some point, Hal is the worst possible choice person that Megamind could have chosen to become uh, the new hero. And there's
And
this line that Hal says when Megamind comes to see him, and I find this line pretty funny. But he says, "Is this a robbery? Because the lady across the hall has way better stuff than me." And I think that like sums up his character perfectly. That he is willing to throw this old lady under the bus, possibly be even killed by the supervillain, just to protect his own skin.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
And
I
and because Megamind wants him to play the hero, that's when we see that I do have a choice. Things don't have to go the way that everyone else says they go because I, as a human, which I guess in his case he's not human, but as a being, I have free will.
right. Well, and I the idea of free will. I think that goes into when in the beginning in the beginning narration. So his Megamind's father says you are destined for, and it cuts out,
Right.
which leaves it very open. You're destined for what? And so that
Right.
that there is that free will there.
And actually, I wasn't even building up to this, but one of the final things Megamind says is maybe destiny is not the path given to us, but the path we choose for ourselves. And
Well,
you go ahead.
okay, so on that, right? There's also another line that plays into the idea of making your own destiny, making your own fate. Um, I don't remember who says it. Let me find it here. Somebody, I think I don't remember who says it. Um, but somebody says I think it's Roxy. Somebody says heroes aren't born, they're made.
Yeah, Roxy says that.
So yeah, heroes aren't born, they're made. And so that goes back into the idea of making your own destiny, which I will point out, according to society, Metro Man is a hero, but he's a hero, quote unquote, from birth. So that automatically takes him out of actually being a hero.
Right. Because he wasn't
Whereas,
born. Right.
right, and I think, does this happen before Hal becomes Titan? Because isn't that where
Uh,
the idea of
yeah.
so right? So it happens before Titan is created. So he thinks that he can create this hero, which which tracks based on what she said. But then we see Megamind becoming the hero. He takes his destiny into his own hands and becomes a hero.
And see, I think that goes back to nature versus nurture. Uh,
The fact that, quote unquote, heroes aren't born, they're made would imply that it's not something that you have naturally. It's something that is instilled in you over the course of you being raised. Which it could be argued that that's what happened with Metro Man, but from the instance of him landing in that house, he immediately starts flying.
so then he has greatness thrust upon him, and as he says later in the film, he never had a choice.
Right.
But we see with Titan that even though Megamind tried to make him a hero, he couldn't because he was inherently evil. Yet then, because of that mistake, Titan then becomes the villain, and Megamind has to rise to the occasion and become the hero to fight Titan.
Right. And
So
so
even
it's
though,
Even though Megamind says at the end, destiny is not the path given to us, but the one we choose for ourselves, everything that happened in the film up to that point was necessary for him to become the hero in the end.
yeah. Well, and this really I think plays into the duality of making your own destiny and inherent destiny. Because honestly, we can make the argument that, Megamind was supposed to inject Hal with the superhero juice, which would lead him to, you
be the
know,
hero.
right. So that duality, of nurture versus nature, destiny versus creating your own fate. is really interesting because neither answer is correct. It all just depends on what you say, like what you believe.
No, yeah, I definitely think that this film, because I thought about the nature versus nurture thing before watching it this time, because this is a movie I've seen maybe 3 or 4 times before. So I was obviously familiar with the material.
But I thought that it was going to lean more towards the nurture answer to the question because Megamind and Metro Man are both raised in different scenarios. But then because of how the answer becomes muddled, and then of course by the end, you don't really know which one comes out on top, nature or nurture, and really it becomes a case by case scenario. And I think, like you're saying, that feeds into the destiny thing. We don't know, like maybe it was all Megamind's choice to become the hero at the end, but at the same time, if Metro Man had never left, or if he had never accidentally shot Hal, would he have ever become the hero?
Yeah, and I think,
So,
and I'll say to that, I don't think I think the answer is no. I think that if, um, well, I say that, like, well, I don't know. It's an answer that it's a question that can't be answered.
well, I think answering it like they do, so ambiguously, it's perfect because as an audience member, that allows you to kind of come up with your own answer. And obviously, this film was made for kids, and we're discussing it on our podcast, so it objectively is not saying anything, but there's definitely a lot of pieces here that I think the case we're making for Megamind being this deep, uh, introspective film about existentialism and identity and meaning and destiny. I think all the pieces are there for that reading.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so there's two more things I want to talk about. One of them being um, the character Titan. So when I first saw this, I don't know about you, but I like to watch things with captions, um, because there are things you pick up that you otherwise wouldn't. And Titan is spelled Tighten,
Right.
which I think he does end up spelling out later
Yeah, he
in
says
the
he like
scene.
writes out Titanville.
Yeah. Um, but there's a few things to talk about that here. If you're not watching it with captions, you would have expected it to be Titan, a very heroic name, a very um, powerful name that is a name for a superhero. But then later, after he makes this shift into kind of villainy, he spells it out, and it subverts that expectation of being Titan and is Tighten.
I wasn't thinking about that, but that kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier about oppressors and the oppressed. If someone is tightening the grip on you, then you are becoming more oppressed. So him spelling it like that seems to just be like a haha, he's dumb kind of joke, but really he is like enabling this control on the city and is tightening his grasp on it that then forces Megamind to become the hero.
I did not even think about that at all. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Well, I don't think we're gonna get any better than that, Jake.
Well, I've got one more thing that is kind of happens close to the beginning, um, and kind of goes back to the idea of like oppression and kind of like the whole this society as a whole, how it plays into fighting back against oppression and whatnot. So the first time Megamind escapes, he switches bodies with
The Warden.
the warden, and without even like questioning his voice is different. Without questioning anything, they let Megamind walk out. And He's got different mannerisms, a different voice. Um, and I think that this kind of the other people here kind of represent the easily impressionable and the uneducated.
Yeah.
Because they don't really pay attention to what's happening here. They just see it and they accept it blindly without a second thought. And then in this same kind of scene, you had mentioned earlier, Metro Man saying, "And I love you too, random citizen." But before that, he makes note. He has a quote. I don't remember how it starts out, but he says, "All of you helpless citizens." Kind of how they don't really have a power in this scenario, and how they perceive him, right? So without, like we said before, without them knowing anything really, they accept the fact that Metro Man's the hero, Megamind is the villain.
Yeah. They're ignorant, which
Exactly.
is what really allows them, which is what allows Titan to become the oppressor later in the film, because he defeats Megamind, and then I'm assuming it's the mayor, but I don't think it's
Yes,
ever
I
clear.
think it is.
But this guy comes up to him and is like, "Oh, we saved you. What's your name?" And he's like, "My name's Titan, and I didn't save you. I'm the bad guy," or whatever he says.
Yeah,
And that kind of reinforces that the citizens of Metro City, or Metrocity, as Megamind says, just blindly accept everything that falls in their lap,
right.
which actually goes back to Destiny, and they believe that Destiny is happening and everything is good, whereas Megamind says Destiny is the path we choose for ourselves.
Are your dogs okay? What is happening?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. You can hear him.
Yeah, I can hear him real loud.
Somebody must have walked up the stairs or something.
Okay, go. All right, yeah, yeah. So I think that this is it's maybe kind of a call to action, really, to instead of just accepting society, fight back against it, and kind of if we talk about identity, right, we also need to talk about individualism,
Yeah,
because without individualism there is no identity, because then we have groupthink, and groupthink is bad because then you just accept everything, and we don't want to just accept everything. We want to find things out for ourselves. And so when you have this blind acceptance, you lose that ability to think for yourself and assess every situation for yourself. So what have we learned about Megamind here? That really, what is the meaning behind Megamind? Number one, we have perception that leads to expectation,
you have to make your own destiny.
and
Uh,
within that destiny is achieving your own identity and individualism, regardless of what society wants.
yeah, find your own role. Don't subscribe to whatever role society has placed upon you. You have to be yourself and find your own destiny in doing that.
Fight back against the oppressors. And
You know, I,
finally, oh, go ahead.
okay, you go ahead.
No, because I'm gonna finalize it. Go ahead.
Well, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. And finally, the most important message is about self-discovery,
Self-discovery.
because that's what it's all about, people. That's it. Find yourself.
I don't remember. Did anybody blow up in this movie?
I don't. I mean, get okay. Well, guaranteed when Titan was spraying his laser beams. I mean, at least one person died.
Well, I guess technically, even though he didn't actually die, Metro Man is believed to have blown up.
Ooh, this is true.
Right, so that's not a real blow up though. So I guess I'll give it a 3 out of 5.
I think I'll go with a 3
which
also.
is also what I gave Chicken Little.
Anyways, I think Megamind is way more deep than anyone gives it credit for. You know, from bee eaters to existential big blue head aliens. I didn't think that we would talk about the things that we talked about here today.
So I
Yeah.
think that for anyone, if this is your first time listening to us, we obviously haven't released very many episodes yet. So if you've just found us, that's great. Hi, please stay and don't go away. But this is the
Yeah,
kind of stuff thing
I
that
know
we
we're
do.
stupid, but just hang in there. We'll open
So
your eyes.
I think Megamind is much more profound than really anybody gives it credit for. And so I hope that you listeners will keep coming back because we're going to be the ones that are giving you these profound realizations.
And don't forget that it's got like one of the highest rated soundtracks of all
According,
movies.
according to one website I looked at several months ago, Megamind had the #1 movie soundtrack of all time. I don't remember what the website was, but it was definitely #1.
And if it's on the internet,
It's
it's true.
true. All right. So with that, Jake, do you want to tell them where they can talk to us, give us recommendations, or give us any questions they might have?
Yeah, so if you got any questions, comments, cries of outrage, things you agree with, things you don't agree with, if you want to call us a bunch of bozos who don't know anything, we know, but you can tell us again if you want to. You can find us at Twitter, at Pacino Pod. Or if you just want to shoot us an email, you can send it over to pacinopodcast@gmail.com.
All right. So with that, I'm going to give you a stout and sauerkraut, and I'll see you later.
Stout and sauerkraut.